yesterday I was watching Joey Diaz, one of his podcasts, and he mentioned this show called The Last 24 Hours or something like that. The Last 24 or something. And, I was immediately interested because he was interested. He thought it was very compelling. So I looked it up and, they have all these, they give you the last 24 hours of Jim Morrison and Marilyn Monroe and whoever, and I was watching this one on, I was watching this one on Michael Jackson, and this kind of comes into, well, let me just brief. I was watching that, and then I was watching a Joe Rogan thing from 2014. It was episode 566, I think. And so that's not even halfway through his podcasts. It was 2014, and he was interviewing Sue Aikens, who is this woman who, if you've seen this show called Life Below Zero, about the outback in Alaska and people who live there. She lives up in a little place called Kavik. I think it's west of Barrow, Alaska, which is the northernmost point in America. It's one of those towns where it gets dark for 4 months, and during the summer it's light for 4 months. I actually wrote a novel about that starts and takes place partially in Barrow, Alaska, which is also called Utqiagvik, which is the original name, going back however many thousands of years. Now it's called Utqiagvik again, but for a long time it was called Barrow, and a lot of people still call it Barrow. Anyway, Sue lives in a place called Kavik by herself for most of the year, maybe all of the year. She has people stop in there who are on their way to somewhere else, and she puts them up, and that's how she makes her living. But most of the time she's alone. And if you haven't seen Life Below Zero and know who Sue Aikens is, man, you should check that out. But I'm thinking about how varied the human experience is, and Sue Aikens, who lives by herself, and I think about the choice to do that, and I don't know the history of her life. I know she has a grandkid or maybe more, but there seems to be, what I read some pain into that life, and I know she likes to drink, and but she's an amazing person. She's self-sufficient and totally alone. And then I compare that to Michael Jackson, who was completely alone also in his own capacity. And so and I and then I was thinking about people like Joey Diaz, and I think about him, and he's got a beautiful wife and a 4 or 5 year old daughter now, but a lot of his life is so you can just see the loneliness on this guy's face, and how you watch his podcast, and he's constantly smoking or eating those edibles. He and this guy Lee Syatt, who works for him, for a while they were taking these edibles that had 500 milligrams of THC in it. And just as a comparison, I at some point took these little gummy bears that were 10 milligrams, and that was complete. I wouldn't have wanted to take more than 10 milligrams. These guys are on 500 milligrams of THC. to the point where, they're so cashed out when they're doing the podcast, when they're doing a broadcast, completely, almost, to the point where Lee is kind of going in and out of consciousness and kind of laughing, and not able to understand what's going on. And I think about those guys. I think about, the pain of their lives and what is it that, why were they doing that? Why are they displaying to the world, what I think of as abuse of THC. It's nobody's business, who wants to use what. And nobody can talk about anybody else's dilemma, and or if somebody decides to go sober or semi-sober or quasi-sober, pseudo-sober, because Joey Diaz doesn't use coke, but he uses pot and other things, and he still drinks and stuff. It's like nobody's business, right? Because, and this goes back to Anthony Bourdain. I did a show the other day about Anthony Bourdain, who didn't use cocaine or heroin anymore, but he drank his ass off, and he died that way, and, probably was very depressed from alcohol. But it's nobody's business, right? It's nobody's business who wants to do what. Somebody doesn't want to drink, somebody wants to go sober, somebody, whatever. But it is, when it's that in your face. Okay, so, when you're a public figure and you have that big of a following, and these guys are doing, that kind of, to that degree, 500 milligrams of THC, because, at that point, it's hallucinatory. It's a whole, experience that cannot be abated until it goes out of your system, and you're at the mercy of what's happening in your mind, and is there an underlying cause, feature to the use, to wanting to do that, to wanting to display it, to, and, I think this is all fair game to talk about. Let's go back to Joe Rogan, who has lots of shows about DMT and other things, and he regularly gets high on the show and drinks and whatever. And it seems like Rogan has it under control. It's obvious that he likes to get high, and Eddie Bravo likes to get high, and people like to get high. And the world's getting high right now, especially in 30 states in the U.S., this is going on. But the human condition is so frail, And I was thinking about Joey Diaz and how he has a lifetime issue of being overweight, to the extent that really, if anyone was ever a candidate for that gastro surgery where they, remove most of your stomach, he was, and he has lost some weight, but, I just still think, like, the guy gets high all day long. He starts off getting high first thing in the morning. It's the last thing he does before he goes to sleep at night. I'm not being critical of him. And, again, it's none of my damn business. Except to say that because it's such a public thing, is he using food or marijuana to compensate for his pain? That's what I'm really talking about. Is, Michael Jackson in his addiction. And God knows everyone knows why that guy was in pain. because no matter where you stand on his two trials, one in 1994, one in 2005, no matter where you stand on those things, for him to go through that public humiliation had to be one of the most excruciating things that a human being could go through, especially starting off at being, Michael Jackson, king of pop worldwide, to, Wacko Jacko and all that stuff, which I'm not really trying to go into. What I'm going into is the state of being human, and the pain and anguish that is a requirement for participation or non-participation. I spend a lot of my time alone. It doesn't matter whether you're with people or not. There's a certain amount of pain that goes along with this. It's part of the contract. And, and the wildly swinging ways that people, deal with this. Sue Aikens, who's this very large woman, she's probably 6 feet tall or more, and big, husky, and she decides to isolate, literally in the most isolated state in the Union. She makes sure that she's 500 miles away from any other human being. And well, because I brought up the subject of Michael Jackson, I did watch this thing last night called Last 24 Hours or something like that. And there were a few things that I didn't really understand about Michael Jackson. One of them, and no matter where you stand on Michael Jackson, it's still Fascination Street. It doesn't seem to be, it's still, worthy of discussion, and it always will be, I think. But the one thing that I didn't understand was that after he in 1984, he was doing a Pepsi commercial, and he had all this glycerin in his hair, and his hair caught on fire, and everybody knows that. But the extent to which the burns weren't really known until his autopsy, because he had any kind of hair that he had was semi-glued on. It was semi-permanent glue was used, but if you remove that, he was bald on the top of his head, all the way back here. He only had some hair tufts right here. He looked kind of crazy. If he wasn't wearing a wig, he would have looked crazy to us. Kind of like a clown or something. And I guess as far as Michael Jackson goes, the thing that just kept coming back was the intensity of his life experience as compared to almost all of us. He had a lot of Elizabeth Taylor and Presley, Lisa Marie Presley. He had people around him who were very high profile, but it had to be just like almost impossible for him to relate. I think this is why he hung out with children, because he could relate to his own childhood. I don't think he could relate to his own adulthood. This is a really good question. Like, are there times in your life where suddenly you don't have the capacity or the tool set to deal with what you're being given? And I'm sure we can all locate those times in our lives where that happened. Whether it's the death of a loved one, or you have a car wreck, or something happens, you go broke, or whatever it is, some sending us into alarm, sending us past our point of ability to deal. And here's another thing. people who go on stage, especially, but people who challenge themselves in all kinds of ways, whether it's bungee jumping, God knows, there's this thing where people love to push themselves into uncomfortable places to see what that feels like, because it's better than being bored by far. I remember being friends with people, whether it was male or female, where suddenly they would challenge you in unexpected ways. In other words, to not push your buttons, but literally challenge you. And challenge your idea of what you thought was a friendship. To suddenly hit you with something that you didn't think was coming. That happened to me a few times. Just hold on. That happened to me a few times where, hold on just one sec. I gotta let the dog out. Yeah, where somebody all of a sudden was giving you some pizzazz that wasn't comfortable. Well, shitty. Okay, so shitty. Shitty. You ever get that from somebody? Yeah, that's a real interesting one. Suddenly willing to forego all the trust you've ever had and just go shitty dark on you. That's a real head twister. I try not to do that to people, but you know what? I have a dark sliver, and I think I've given people the business end sometimes when they weren't expecting it, but probably based on it happening to me. But my point is that the reason they do that, it's not because they dislike you. It's because they want that challenge and they want that particular stimulation. That particular thing, and I'm guessing that people have affairs for that reason, or have these secret things in their lives, that then become a surprise to their significant others or the people around them. God, I was talking yesterday about people who decide to rob a bank. And I swear, I think a lot of them are, I'm sure most of them are broke, but some of them want that rise, that, you can't get that. You can't get the bank robbery hit any other way. People who hijack cars or whatever. And yeah, maybe they just want a car or they need a ride or whatever. But a lot of it, I think, has to do with this need for stimulation. This need to have that kind of immediacy and contact with the world that is so far out. People who go on crime sprees. I can imagine that being, because what they do is they abandon all the rules of society. And whether it's just stealing or whether it's killing and stealing, I can imagine that produces a euphoria in them at not having to play by the rules for until this thing plays itself out, till death do us part, man. We're gonna ride this out, Bonnie and Clyde style, until we're dead, or maybe captured. Breaking out of a prison. And I'm not trying to make that okay. I'm not saying that I think it would be fun to go on a crime spree. What I'm saying is the people that decide that, for them, it becomes a majestical, tunnel of experience that they realize in the moment is singular. Nobody else is doing this. It's us. You turn on the news, we're in the news. For now, it's us. It's our turn. And I mean, there has to be, and there's some underlying problems with the personality there, where they are seeking recognition, temporary recognition, feeling that the future did not hold anything more promising than, flash in the pan, being a bright star that's going to burn and then be gone. But Michael Jackson's nervous system, at having done concerts in front of 100,000 people, being lauded as the most talented singer, dancer, composer, producer on the planet, that, and then being accused, rightfully or wrongfully, with that same audience attention worldwide, every eye and heart on you. God. Can you imagine? Joey Diaz. How much cocaine can you snort anyway? How high can you be before you have a heart attack? Why didn't he have a heart attack? He's huge. This guy's 350 or 400 pounds, even 400 plus. I mean, what? Where was his heart attack hiding all that time? He's got kilos of cocaine, doing crazy shit, smoking constantly, and the whole thing. Where was... But seeking some kind of ultimate dopamine trip, it's almost, and I think of that as like, taking enough drugs so that it feels like you're a president, or you're Michael Jackson, or you're, yeah. I was checking out a photograph yesterday of Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo, and I don't know what year this was, but they were younger, and the main thing that I was blown away by was that neither one of them had any tattoos. So whenever this was, but they've been friends that long, certainly pre-tattoo. And Eddie Bravo was real into rock and roll back then, and Rogan was doing his martial arts or whatever. Somehow, I don't know how they got together, but they didn't have any tattoos, and that led me down a rabbit hole of like tattoos, which I love looking at them and thinking about why people cover themselves in tattoos, which essentially kind of, I think of it as kind of like makeup, kind of like dolling up. It's, as essentially a mating display. We're animals. My dad always used to tell me, he thought that everything that a person does has to do an underlying unconscious thing of that has to do with mating or wanting to. And you look at young people, especially, how fixated they are on their appearance. Not young people, old people too. Maybe a lot of old people are more worried about it. Makeup and tattoos. Look at Michael Jackson. He was into makeup and tattoos. He had his eyebrows were tattoos, and he had tattoos around his eyes, and tons of makeup. He had an underlying cause, which was, that pigmentation problem he had with his skin. But I feel like he would have been, because he was a stage performer and the whole thing, he would have been using makeup anyway. How fixated we are. And it's programmed in so that you go on YouTube and see all of these young women copying each other with makeup and hairstyles and all these mirror shots. That's male and female. People taking pictures of themselves in the mirror. We are. But it's not just. I don't think it's just notoriety. I think it's true. It has to do with a compulsion to be attractive for the purpose of pair bonding. It's a mating display to get together, right? I'm thinking. I had a discussion with my twin sister not long ago, and we talked about whether or not this is a true idea. And she said, no, it's not. It's not true. Most of the things in the world have nothing to do with sex or mating or having children or anything else. She says, look at all the things people study at a university, all the languages people speak, and my dad's argument was, if a man builds a building, he's showing off. He's preening his feathers for the purpose of mating. I don't know the answer. They're kind of good arguments on either side. Are we humble creatures or are we peacocks? I don't know. Are some of us more humble and not unassuming and not seeking that out? It's a weird one. And a lot of people who figure out that they're not, at least in their own minds, they're not so good looking, they're not so attractive, they move on to other things. They move right on. And they find, an interest in life and realize that maybe they're not going to have that perfect family or that beautiful family or that beautiful wife or those beautiful kids or whatever it is. But are they secretly disappointed? Are they, I don't know, all the lonely people. Why didn't any of the Beatles end up in rehab? Why not? I guess they kind of went down that psychedelic road rather than the dopamine road. Why did only one of the Rolling Stones end up in rehab? It's weird. It's a roll of the dice as to who's going to become addicted. I keep talking about it. I'm kind of fascinated with it today. All these things, how we relate to each other, how we relate to fame, how some people have no... Keanu Reeves handled his fame perfectly. Leonardo DiCaprio, he handled his fame so well. And then some people don't. Marilyn Monroe, or I'm thinking of Pirates of the Caribbean. Some people implode or become very different. Johnny Depp, it is an affectation of his former self. Michael Jackson became an affectation of his former self. Like a full-blown, different creation. Not inhuman at all, but the remnants of Steven Tyler, even, you know. I watched him on Joe Rogan recently, and I think he's a neat guy. He's a great singer. There's something, when I say affectation, when you look at how many rings he's wearing and how many things he has in his hair and the necklaces and the whole bit, without which he would feel naked. That's a very affected person. And I would just wonder, like Eric Clapton, after his little drug thing and setting up his drug rehab place and all that, he cut off the long hair and became a very normalized person, without affectation, is what I mean. I wonder about tattoos, in that they're a permanent affectation from an impermanent impulse. So you're going to be this way for the rest of your life, and these young people put on skin makeup that lasts forever. I really wonder about the whole phenomena, and how many people secretly regret doing that. But it's almost that it became so acceptable that we don't see them anymore. We don't see them. But I have a few tattoos, and some days I look and I say, what? It's not that I dislike them at all. I like them. But I wonder about my impulse. I say, what were you thinking on that day, in that period, that made you so sure that you wanted to have those on your body forever? And I don't really have any regrets about it. In fact, I may get a few more. Who knows? But this is all. We're moving as one massive animal. We're undulating, breathing as one creature, and who knows where this ends up. What I do know is that probably I have another 20 to 25, 30 years on the planet. And where we're going to end up is not where we are right now. That's the end of the show today. Be back tomorrow or the next day. See you then.